So, artificial intelligence, it's not science fiction anymore, is it? It is here, and it's changing our world in a huge way, especially when it comes to our jobs. But listen, this isn't some simple story about robots just taking over. It's way more complicated. It's really about what kind of future we actually want to build, who gets to call the shots, and how we're all going to share in the incredible wealth this new technology is promising to create. Okay, let's get into it. So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at which jobs are, maybe surprisingly, right in AI's path. Then, we're going to tackle the huge policy idea of a robot tax. From there, we'll flip the script from top down to bottom up and see how workers are actually fighting for their own seat at the table. We'll even look at their specific playbook. And finally, we'll lay out the two clear paths forward as we try to shape this automated future of ours. All right, first up, who is AI really targeting? You know, when we think about automation, our minds usually go to factory floors, right? Assembly lines, that kind of thing. But the reality with generative AI, well, it's turning out to be a whole lot more surprising. So let me ask you, if you had to take a guess, which job, which profession do you think is the most likely to be transformed by AI? You're probably thinking about administrative work, maybe data entry, but the real answer, well, it's pretty ironic. Check this out. The number one spot by a long shot is software development. A massive 81% of the skills needed for a software job are exposed to what's called hybrid transformation. I mean, just think about that for a second. The very people who are creating AI are the ones whose jobs are most likely to be reshaped by it. And right behind them, you've got data and analytics, accounting, and IT. In a strange twist, the creators are becoming the subject of their own creation. Okay, so why? Why is this happening? Well, it's because generative AI is just a perfect match for the kinds of things a developer does all day. You know, writing code, hunting for bugs, giving advice on how to build a program. These are all routine, repeatable tasks that are based on information. And that's exactly what AI is getting incredibly good at. Now, this doesn't mean developers are just going to vanish, but it does mean their job could change from, doing the work to directing the AI that does the work. Big difference. But the impact goes so much deeper than just automating a few tasks. As researcher Matt Bean points out here, this new way of working threatens how skills are passed down from one generation to the next. For decades, a junior developer learned the ropes from more senior people. It was a hands-on apprenticeship that passed on all this tacit knowledge, the stuff that's really hard to just write down in a manual. If AI starts handling all the routine problems, how do the rookies ever get the practice they need to become experts? It's a real break in the chain. So, facing this kind of massive disruption, you have to ask, what on earth do we do about it? Well, one of the biggest ideas being thrown around is a top-down government solution, something people are calling the robot tax. This debate is a real clash of titans. On one side, you have people saying a robot tax is absolutely essential. They argue it could replace the income tax we'd lose from human jobs, it could help fight the huge inequality that might happen if only a few people own all the robots, and it could pay for retraining programs for workers. But on the other side, opponents are shouting that this is basically a tax on innovation itself. They say it'll slow down progress, hurt companies trying to compete with rivals overseas who are automating like crazy, and that it's just not an efficient way to tax capital. And look, this is not some far-off futuristic problem. The robots are already here, and their numbers are exploding. In Singapore, for every 10,000 workers in manufacturing, there are 831 industrial robots. South Korea is at 774. Germany is at 338. The automated workforce is already in place, and it's growing every single day. And this slide really shows you what's at stake for governments. It all comes down to the budget. In most developed countries, taxes on labor, so income tax, social security, that's how governments make most of their money. In the European Union, it's about half of all tax revenue. Now just imagine if a big chunk of human work gets replaced by robots that don't pay taxes. That blows a massive hole in the government's wallet, right at the exact moment you might need more money for things like unemployment benefits. So, what would this robot tax even look like? Well, some economists have actually run the numbers to find an optimal tax, one that raises money without completely killing innovation. One of the leading models suggests a tax rate of about 7% for the first 10 years a robot is in use. And here's the clever part. The tax would be temporary. It would decrease over time. The goal isn't to stop automation forever. It's to tap the brakes just enough to give society time to adjust. But what if a big government tax isn't the answer? What if the solution comes from the ground up instead? Well, that brings us to our third section, this alternative path, where workers themselves, through their unions, are grabbing a seat at the table to negotiate their own future with AI. The most famous examples of this, of course, came out of those huge Hollywood strikes in 2023. The Writers Guild of America, the WGA, they got this incredible deal. They made sure that AI-generated text can't be considered source material. Now that sounds technical, but it's huge because it protects a writer's credit and their paycheck. And similarly, the actors union SAG-AFTRA won these critical protections over what they call digital replicas, meaning studios now have to get an actor's permission and pay them every time their AI likeness is used. And this fight isn't just about Hollywood. It's happening all over. The Teamsters union at UPS successfully negotiated a ban on those inward-facing cameras in their trucks. They also made sure a driver can't be disciplined based only on data from a GPS tracker. And out in Las Vegas, the super powerful culinary union won a contract that gives workers a big severance package, $2,000 for every year they worked, if their job gets replaced by technology or AI. This quote from Amazon labor organizer Chris Smalls just cuts right to the heart of it. This isn't just about jobs disappearing, it's about the quality of the jobs that are left. We're seeing the rise of this algorithmic management, where workers are managed by an app, constantly watched and measured. And like he says so perfectly, it's not prison, it's work. And that feeling, that's what's driving so many people to demand a say. Okay, so we've seen the big headline wins, but what does this union playbook actually look like in the fine print? Let's get into the nitty-gritty and look at the actual groundbreaking language they've managed to get into these contracts. The SAG-AFTRA deal is just a masterclass in how to establish digital rights for workers. It really rests on 3 pillars. First, there's consent. A studio can't just scan an actor and then use their likeness forever. Nope, they need specific permission for a specific use. Second, compensation. If that digital you is used, the real you gets paid as if you were actually on set. And third, and this is so important, control. A digital replica made for one movie can't just be dropped into a sequel or some other project without a whole new negotiation. They've essentially stopped their digital selves from becoming a free, reusable asset for the studios. It's brilliant. And the writers' deal, Article 72, is just as smart. First, it establishes a core truth. AI is not a writer. What it spits out is not literary material. That's the magic contractual phrase for what writers get paid for. Second, it gives writers a choice. A studio can't force a writer to use something like ChatGPT. It's up to them. And third, it protects their value. If a writer is hired to clean up an AI-generated script, they get full pay and full credit just as if they'd started from a blank page. What this really all boils down to is that they've made sure AI stays a tool, not a replacement. Okay, so we've looked at the surprising targets of AI, we've talked through a top-down government solution, and we've seen this bottom-up worker-led movement. Let's pull all these threads together now and look at the 2 very different paths that are emerging for how we're going to manage this whole revolution. So it really leaves us with 2 competing ways forward. The first is top-down regulation. This is the world where governments take the lead. They use big policy levers like a robot tax to manage the economic shift for everyone and pay for safety nets. The second path is bottom-up action. This is where the power is more spread out, and workers, through their unions, are negotiating very specific rules for their own workplaces, directly with their bosses. Now, these 2 paths could work together, but they represent 2 totally different ideas about who should have the power to shape our future. And that, really, leaves us with the ultimate question. The technology is here. It's moving faster than any of us can really process. The choice isn't if we're going to use AI anymore, it's how. And the critical question that we all need to answer is this. Who gets to decide? Should it be governments setting broad rules for all of society? Should it be companies chasing profit and efficiency? Or should it be the workers themselves negotiating the terms of how they work alongside these new machines? The answer to that question is going to define the world of work for the next 100 years.